Welcome to The Right Focus, a podcast for writers, newbies, and veterans, and everyone in between. We're hosted by M.A. Lee with the assistance of Remy Black and Edie Rooms, all from Writers Inc. Books. Our focus is productivity, process, craft, and tools. Each episode lasts as long as it takes to fix a quick dinner, drive a short commute, or take a brisk walk. Resources and links are in the show notes. Visit us at therightfocus.blogspot.com. Now, on to this week's episode. So, welcome to The Right Focus. You are Lois Winston. Tell us about yourself and your writing.
Okay, I'm not somebody who grew up thinking that I wanted to write novels. It never occurred to me until I was in my 40s. And I was on a business trip one day and I had a dream. And the weird thing about that is that I usually don't remember my dreams. I remembered this one. And over the course of the next few days, it kept unfolding every night like the chapters of a book. And I finally decided to put it down on paper just to kind of get it out of my system. And next thing I knew, I had a 50,000 word manuscript that spanned 35 years. I had no idea how unpublishable that was. But, I thought I had written the great American novel. I eventually discovered after the rejection letters filled my mailbox that I had written the great American drivel. But I've been bitten by the writing bug.
To yourself.
I mean, it was bad. It really was bad. I decided I enjoyed the writing process and I set out to learn what I was doing wrong and how to do it right. I joined a bunch of writing organizations. I went to seminars and workshops, at conferences, and I eventually got an agent. And this was not a short process. It took 10 years from the time that I sat down to write that one unpublishable book until we finally got an offer on a book. And as it turned out, the second book that I sold was that first unpublishable book that over the course of the 10 years, I had been going back from time to time and revising and revising and revising some more. And the 50,000 word romance that spanned 35 years became a 95,000 word romantic suspense that took place over a few months. And like I said, it was the second book I sold.
That's an interesting journey into it. And I'm so glad that it became something that became a viable product for you to use.
Yeah, it was very fulfilling to see that something that I had worked at for so long finally paid off. And then the first book that I had sold was chick lit. It was back right after Bridget Jones' Diary came out.
Right.
And one day my agent said, "Why don't you try your handwriting chick lit?" And I did. And that was the first book that sold. And it was a humorous story, basically a fish out of water story about a woman who goes off to New York City and her mother from in Iowa who wants to go and drag her back to marry the boy next door. That was called Talk Gertie to me. And after the second book, which became Love Lies and a Double Shot of Deception, sold, one day my agent called me up and she said, "Have you ever thought about writing a mystery series?" And I said, "No." I had never read Nancy Drew as a kid. I was a Cherry Ames girl. There was a time when I wanted to be a nurse, being influenced by Cherry Ames. She said, "I want you to give it a try, give it some thought, see what you come up with," because she had just had lunch with an editor who was looking for a cozy mystery series about a crafter. And in my day job, I worked as a designer for craft kit manufacturers and craft book publishers and magazines that had craft projects in them. So I sat down and I came up with Assault with a Deadly Glue Gun, which was the first book in my Anastasia Pollock Crafting mystery
Mhm.
series. And then as often happens in the publishing industry, we thought we had a sale with this editor. She loved the book, but this was a publishing house that was in the process of being bought by a huge conglomerate, and they weren't giving out any, they weren't writing any contracts at the time until the sale went through. So everything was on
And they were
hold.
getting smaller.
Well, no, they were actually getting bigger, but what happened was as soon as the sale went through, the first thing they did was change the name of the company. The
Mhm.
second thing they did was cancel the Cozy Mystery line.
Oh,
So I never got the contract. It took another 2 years before we were able to sell the series. And I've just have right now the 14th book in the series, which is called Seems Like the Perfect Crime, with Seams spelled Seams,
yes.
is on pre-order.
Carrying
And
through that crafter idea.
right, right. And so I've written 14 books in the series now and three connecting novellas. And I've been on bestseller list, and I have won some awards, and I never went back to writing romance or chick lit.
So because you took the humor that was in those first two novels and you
Right.
put it into the cozy
Well,
mystery.
the second novel really wasn't humorous. The second novel was kind of a dark romantic suspense. It was
Ah,
very emotional, but there were bits of humor in the dialogue occasionally, because humor, um, even in the darkest of books, I think that you need to have a release of
yes.
tension sometimes. And, having your characters say something in a humorous way to deal with what they're dealing with, it works. So there were little bits of humor in the book here and there, but the first book was definitely a humorous novel.
It helps to have humor. I mean, I taught for years. Shakespeare deliberately puts humor into plays. I think Hamlet is the least funny of all of his plays. Macbeth has several laugh out loud moments, and Romeo and Juliet has many laugh out loud moments. And so the humor keeps the play, especially tragedies and dark stories, from a downward trajectory all the way through. It gives a sort of,
Right.
I guess I call it ocean wave because it goes
Yeah.
up and down
But
like a
even
roller
in
coaster.
Hamlet, you've got Rosencrantz and Guildenstern in there, and
Mhm.
that's a bit of a humorous element.
Yes, but that's about it. Everything else
Yeah.
is doom and gloom from the very beginning. Um, how do you find it difficult to maintain the humor and to work the humor into the stories? Are you constantly writing down little snippets that you know will be funny? Uh,
I'm somebody who never thought of myself as being a humorous person. I never can remember a joke. I, never remember punchlines. I can't tell a joke to save my life. But I found that when I was writing, the humor came out. And it's, for me, writing humor in dialogue seems to be very easy. It's not, I don't write slapstick
mhm.
stories. The humor always is more observational. It's the way the
Right.
characters look at life, and that's
Mhm.
where the humor comes out.
Yes. Like most I hate to use this terminology, but most clean comedians who they find the irony in
Right.
life and point that out instead of
Irony. I use
yes.
a lot of puns.
Hmm.
Uh, the book that came out last year before this recent one was called Sorry Not Sorry, with the
Hmm.
not spelled KNOT. So
Right.
I'm always doing things like that. I love alliteration.
Hmm.
I love the way some of my characters will take a trite phrase and manipulate it to make it funny and not trite, but still basically say the same thing.
Right. Do you have trouble coming up with your titles?
Um, I don't. I just, I sometimes the title comes before the plot.
Oh, really?
I have a whole list of titles that I have come up with, and I will go and I'll look at the titles and well, what haven't I done yet? And I
Mhm.
have I have lists of craft related words
Mhm.
and murder type related words like, treachery and assault and words like that.
Right.
And then I just play around with them and see what I can do in the way of putting them together and come up with something that's unique that hopefully hasn't been done before. I always go and I do a search to make sure that I'm not coming up with a title that someone else has come up with
Mhm.
because I don't want to compete with a book that's already been published, and I don't
Right.
want somebody to think I stole the title
Mhm.
from some other author. It's even though titles can't be copyrighted, it's not something that you want to strive for, copying a title from somebody. So
It creates this animus
right,
in the
right.
person that it you double up on, and that's not good.
Yeah, it's like when my first book came out, the month before Talk Gertie was released, there
Mhm.
was another romance author who released a book called Talk Nerdy to Me.
Ah.
And I
Mhm.
and I know that it was totally coincidence
Mhm.
because of how long it takes for a book to get published once it's
Right.
sold and everything. But it was still like, oh no.
Yeah.
And then they came out with a cover that was basically pink, and my cover was basically pink. So it looked like the books were competing against each other, but they were
Mhm.
totally different stories.
Right. And
And I'm
that's very
sure that
difficult.
she probably had the same reaction when she
Mhm.
saw my book coming out. That you don't you hope that that doesn't happen.
Now, for people who are not familiar with Anastasia Pollock, the
Mhm.
series, do you do a different craft in each book?
Each book is a different craft. When I was asked to write the series, I did a lot of research and I discovered that most crafting mysteries, the protagonist is either a crafter of a specific craft, like a knitter or a quilter, or
Right.
owns a craft shop, or is involved in like a quilting bee organization or something like that. And it's the same craft over and over.
Mhm.
And I wanted to come up with something different. I didn't want to compete with books that were already on the market. I didn't
Right.
want my protagonist to own a craft store, or I also didn't want a small town environment. I'm a city girl
Mhm.
and I wanted the city sensibility. I'm a Jersey girl, and there is so much you can tap into from living and growing up in New Jersey. And I could also move my character around. It's a small state within less than an hour. You can be in the mountains, you can be down the shore, you can be in New York City or in Philadelphia. There's a lot to choose from in the way of locations. And I made her the crafts editor at a women's magazine because that also gave me a lot of options of where I could set my
Right.
stories.
And the
Um,
people who would be interacting, that she would be interacting with.
right. So she's been in, at a on a television set of a morning show. She has she has worked at a consumer show. She has moon done moonlighting at a rehabilitation center. There's so much that I can tap into with a career like that, and I was able to basically look at my own career and the various things that I had done
Mhm.
and use that.
So you don't have to do a lot of research about crafts because you have enough of the basic knowledge that you can walk into it.
Yeah, my research is basically making sure that I'm not writing something that is impossible as far as how the victim was killed, if I'm doing something with poisons, or there's a an online site that, as it turns out, my critique partner co-hosts, called Crime Scene Writer. And there are a lot of experts in different fields that are on that, and they are there primarily to answer questions for authors so that we get things right. There's a coroner, an FBI agent, uh, different medical personnel, lawyers, and I'm constantly asking questions just to make sure, I'll pose something, I'll say, is this going to work? Is this realistic enough?
Right.
And
Right.
if it's not, they offer suggestions, and people on that are really fabulous. They are so giving of their time to answer authors' questions. So that's primarily where I go for research for technical things.
And say the name of that place again, because writers need to know that resource.
Crime Scene Writer.
Crime
It's
scene,
a
right?
groups.io group, and
Okay.
it's open to anyone.
Okay. Pretty much like the Short Mystery Fiction Society is open to anyone.
Right.
Uh, I think that's really good because I know if I'm watching a television show and they do something that I just have a very sideways connection into law enforcement. And if they do something that I know would never occur, that show loses all credibility with me. And
Right.
I don't even believe anything for the rest of it. And that suspension of disbelief is so necessary when you're presenting a fiction story because you want your reader to be engaged. And as soon as they're thrown out of the story, they lose their delight in what they're reading.
Right. Like the forensic person who shows up wearing stilettos and a designer dress. I mean, that would never happen.
Yes.
Or getting DNA results within an hour.
Yes, that's a big one. That is a big one. Now, this series is about writers and the technology, although I've been going all over the place with everybody that I have interviewed. Talk to me about technology that you find very beneficial in your day-to-day work as writing.
Um, Basically using the internet for research is a big one. I I don't use a lot of writing apps. I don't use any writing apps at all. I know some authors do. I just find that when you start using things like that, sometimes you go down a rabbit hole, and it's more about the software than it is the writing. I just sit down and write, and I don't use any special programs to do that. I open up a Word document and I start typing.
I don't
I
want to be struggling with the software that I'm using. I want to get the words out. That's enough of a struggle
Right.
for me.
And I don't think that most of that software is necessary. I think it becomes a crutch.
Yes.
It's just not something that I'm interested in. I don't think I need it, and I think that it would just be more of a hassle than anything.
Mhm. I have had enough problems. I've been around computers since the mid 80s. So those were early days. Um, and I have had several computers crash and die on me. I worked at a place that said, save all your documents onto our server. There will never be a problem. And their server crashed, you know. And so I have
I
learned don't do
Yeah,
that kind of thing at all. Just I'm still very paper based in a lot of ways. I just use the computer basically for ease of presenting my information that I'm getting out. I'm pretty much everything's writing. I turned around and showed my notebook, uh, and that's the way I work best.
I
Um,
have a drive that's plugged into my computer, And once a day, I have it set up once a day to save everything. And once a month, I switch drives. I put one in the safe deposit box and I have one at home plugged into my computer. So I should never lose more than a day's work.
Right.
The reason I have one in the safe deposit box is because, and God forbid there's a fire, say.
Yes. Yeah.
But I don't use the cloud because I keep hearing about clouds being hacked.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, I like having just everything right here that I can control.
Yes. Have you thought, do you create a sort of collage board, like you go onto stock photos and find stock photos to get images of your characters
I
and your
did in the
setting?
beginning. Yeah, I have different photos on my computer of what I think that my characters would look like. If Tina Fey happens to be listening to this podcast, I think she'd be a perfect Anastasia. I would love her to option my series for a TV show or a movie. But
Yeah.
yeah, I have images in my head. I describe Anastasia's love interest as someone whose genetic material cavorted in the primordial soup along with Pierce Brosnan and George Clooney. I don't like doing head to toe descriptions. I
Yeah. And they
think
become
that
a list.
Yeah, and I think it also pulls readers from the scene. It's
Right.
filler and it's more like info dumps. So when I describe characters, I try to describe them in such a way that it gives an impression. And I'll only describe something specific, like something that somebody is wearing, if it's pertinent to the scene.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that makes total sense. Um, I show that we have 8 minutes to go, which means we actually have 18 minutes because I set my timer for 30 and Zoom allows me to go for 40. Um,
Okay.
and I am enjoying our conversation. I just recently wrote a short story and I was like uh, 3,000 words into the short story and I had to have a visual. I usually get my covers done in advance, but I did not get this cover done. And so I had to create a cover from a stock photo just so I would have something that I could look at that would help me set the atmosphere of the story. Do you
Mm-hmm.
do anything like that?
Um, I don't really because my books are set in an actual town
Mm-hmm.
in New Jersey, and the places that I have my characters go are places that I've been to.
Mm-hmm.
Occasionally, I have to come up with something that is totally imaginary, but I'll find something that's similar somewhere and just pretend that it's in a different place.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So I have never made a board the way
Right.
some authors do. I know it's very helpful to some authors. I'm not putting them down, but it's just not something that I've found the need to do because I'm so familiar with the setting where my series takes place.
Your visuals are in your memory already.
It's in my
Yeah.
they're in my head, yeah.
Yeah.
And there
Uh,
are times when I can't remember something exactly, but I can go online and I can find pictures to help me.
Now, Sisters in Crime, at the 1st of November, they allowed people to use that pacemaker software where they counted the words that they were tracking throughout. And that allowed them to see through a chart what their progress was and how they were advancing toward their goal. Do you do anything like that? How do you track your words is basically what I'm
Well,
asking.
I use Microsoft Word and the word count is right down there on the bottom of my screen. I
Right.
try to write 1,000 words a day.
Mhm.
I'm more concerned with writing at least a full scene than an exact word count, but it tends to work out to being about 1,000 words a day.
Right. I've had a Christmas was very disruptive to me. I am only now getting back into my trying to write daily. So how do you handle disruptions and distractions like that?
It's not easy. I'm living in the Nashville area right now
Mhm.
because we moved down here almost 3.5 years ago now because we my 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 husband had a medical issue, and I realized that we have no family left where we were
Oh,
living.
mhm.
And we have one son out in California with his family and another down in Nashville with his family. And the one in Nashville kept saying, you guys are getting older. You really should, move down here. And there was no way I was going to move down south.
I'm
You
sorry you
know,
thought that.
no way, no way. But when my husband had this problem and wound up having surgery in the middle of COVID, and I couldn't even go to the hospital.
Yes.
I started, thinking about all of the what ifs that you worry about as, whenever there is a crisis in your life. And I realized, yeah, it's time for us to move, even though I really didn't want to, and I had to be dragged kicking and screaming.
I hope you've gotten over that because I'm on the other
Somewhat.
side of the state. I'm in East Tennessee.
Somewhat. I did, make a deal saying I'm going back to Jersey at least once a year to visit writing friends and go see some shows on Broadway, and I
Right.
have kept that promise. Um, but it's easier. We have our two youngest grandchildren are down here, and as a matter of fact, they don't go back to school until tomorrow.
Right.
And their father works from home. Our son is in the film industry. He does post-production work, and he has an
Right.
office at his house, and he's on deadline. So it was like, Mom, Dad, can you take the kids today? Really need to work all day. So we ran out over and picked the kids up. And
Yeah.
right now, since I didn't want them in the house while I was on this call with you, my husband took them over to the bowling alley and arcade for an hour.
Because you can't control cats. You can't control children.
Right.
I mean, you
The
can tell
cats I
that.
don't have to worry about because I have allergies. I tried cats at one point when we were first married, and it definitely did not work out.
Before lunch today, I was reminding my family, okay, I have a Zoom interview this afternoon, and my sister said we promised to be quiet, but that doesn't always happen, especially when the littles are here, and you don't want to repress them. You want them to have that joy in life that they
Right.
have.
But they can be very loud. Even when they're
Yes,
trying to be quiet, they can be very
yes.
loud.
And so days like that, when they're here, I don't get any writing done. It's like yesterday, I got all my house things done before they arrived, and then they arrived, and they didn't leave until 7.
Right.
And
And
so,
and that's basically my day to day. Other
yes,
than the time that I'm on Zoom with you, my husband will bring them back, and they'll be here until 5:30 when their father picks
right,
them up.
yeah, yeah. So, do you have anything? I'm checking my time. Do you have anything that you want to talk specifically about your writing journey or what you found difficult? Um, about writing that people who are new to writing just don't understand yet, and you wish they would listen.
I think that people have to understand that, as cliche as it sounds, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. You can't compare yourself to other authors. I have friends that right out of the gate sold their first book for a huge amount of money. I have other friends who have not sold yet, and I think that their books are wonderful. I spent 12 years working for a literary agency, and I think I'm a pretty good, I can tell when a manuscript is good and publishable and when it's not, because I've been trained to do that. And yet some books that we thought were just absolutely fabulous have never sold. And it's not always that they're the fault of the author. It's, you need to have that right book land on that editor's desk on that right day. And
When
then
they're in the right mood.
yeah, and then after that, you need all of the other dominoes to fall into place. I have had situations where editors have loved my books and couldn't convince the editorial board to allow them to buy the book. I had one situation where marketing put the kibosh on a book because they said they didn't know how to sell it.
Right.
And there are so many other factors that come into play. I've had publishers go out of business, go bankrupt, and been orphaned. That's one of the things that I like about being an independent author now, is that I'm not tied to the whims of what goes on in the publishing industry.
When you were orphaned, how many books had you written in your series? And was it difficult to sell the rest
Well,
of the
I was
series?
I was orphaned once, which was after the first two books sold, and the publisher declared bankruptcy.
Right.
I did get the rights back to those books and published them myself. The second time, I had three books that had come out with the mystery series with the Anastasia Pollock books, and I walked away from the publisher.
Right.
And it was not over money, it was over some changes that they wanted to make in the contract. When you have an agent and the agent negotiates a contract with a publisher, that becomes basically the contract that is used for all of that author's work going on along, and also any other authors that that agent brings to the publishing house.
Right.
This publisher had gotten in a new CEO and hired some new legal staff, and they decided, when we were negotiating after, I had the 3-book contract, and we were negotiating for a new contract to extend the series, and also a second contract for a second series that I had. And the legal team decided they were going to make changes to the agent negotiated contract over things that just sent up all kinds of red flags.
Right.
And my agent was very uncomfortable with it. And she said, look, I don't think you should sign this contract. And she explained why. And I realized that she was right. And I decided to walk. And at the time she said, there are all these authors that are starting to do really well, indie publishing. Why don't you give it a try? If it doesn't work out, we can always take the series somewhere else, or you can write something else. And I tried, and I found that I really liked the control that I had. And, to be honest, then unless you are in that 1% of authors who are making, 6 and 7 figures for each book, most of the marketing is left to the author.
Right. Yes.
Publishers do very little in the way of marketing most of their authors.
If they don't spend a ton of money on the author, they're not going to spend money on the publicity.
Yeah, I mean, if you're lucky, you might get some free bookmarks or some free postcards,
Right.
or they may have the publicity department line up a blog tour for you or something like that. I mean, that's stuff that you can do yourself anyway. And, I just found that I'm not doing much more than I would have been doing anyway, other than I'm designing my own covers.
Right.
which I went to art school. I have, the capability of doing that. I don't have to pay somebody to do it for me. So yeah, it was the right move for me at the right time in my life, and I don't regret it. If somebody came along and offered me six figures on an advance for a new book, I would definitely take it,
Oh,
but
yes,
I don't
please,
see that
please.
happening anytime soon.
So they need, if they're in Hollywood and they want to do your series like Tina Fey does, then she needs to contact you directly in Nashville.
That would be great.
We have about 4 minutes. Yes, 4 minutes and 25 seconds remaining from Zoom. Uh, this episode will air about the mid-May. So do you
Great.
have something coming out that you would want to talk about briefly?
Well, the next book coming out is Seems Like the Perfect Crime, which comes out on February 4th. It's on pre-order now. And I've been sitting around trying to come up with an idea for the next book at this point. I have some a blog tour lined up and some other things in the way of publicizing the book when it comes out. But as far as in May, right now, there's nothing on the horizon other than I do have a narrator slash producer who's been putting all of my books into audiobook format. And we have done up through book 12, which was a crafty collage of crime. And she's just started with Sorry Not Sorry. So probably by May, all of the current books in the series will be available in audiobook format.
And that would be great because there are so many people who would not sit down and read a book, but they'll listen to it.
Right.
And that is amazing to me because I've been a reader from a small child. Thank you so much, Lois, for agreeing to do this interview.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
Do I have your bio and a cover image from you?
You had asked me for one, and I did send it. If you
Okay, so if you
don't
sent
have it for
I've
some
got it.
reason, just give me a shout out, and I'll get it to you again.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to The Rock Focus, a podcast for writers at all levels, hosted by Emma Lee from Writers Inc. Books, assisted by Remy Black and Edie Runes. Our focus is productivity, process, craft, and tools. Music is licensed through Audio Jungle, called Background Music Loop. Its creator is Alexander Polishchuk, known on Audio Jungle as Plastic 3. The music comes in different iterations. Show notes and resource links for this and other episodes can be found at therightfocus.blogspot.com. Write to us at winkbooks@aol.com when you have questions, comments, and speculations. We will try to answer you as quickly as possible. By the way, we will not mind your email address. That's rude. If you find value in our content, share with your writing friends or write a review. We're small beans here without the advertising budget of the big peeps, and you can make a difference. And whatever occurs, write on.